Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. This is Paul Bass inviting you to look behind the headlines that make our community and today our world tick. Well, today we have a real pleasure. We have a gentleman who's just back from Ukraine who acted on what the millions of other of us just imagine doing when we're scrolling on our phones and just observing the horrors unfolding hourly in Ukraine, where this country is just being destroyed to rubble and millions of people fleeing for their lives and people just laying dead in the street. And we all wonder, what could you do? Maybe throw a few dollars somewhere, tell your congressman to do what your congressman's going to do, whatever. Well, Adrian Bonenberger went there. He's a military vet, and he went there with two buddies to train everyday Ukrainians with no military experience to take on Russian invaders when they came to their community. Adrian Bonenberger, thank you so much for coming into WNHH-FM.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here. I'm a huge fan of The Independent and
great.
your work.
All right, then you're very welcome to have some tea and everything else. Adrian, you went to Lviv, which before we went on the air, we said these days people are saying Lviv. I was thinking like we grew up with Kiev, right? Now it's Kyiv, you know?
That's right.
And never mind China and India and those cities there. And when did you go and when did you come back?
So we left, I think it was the 1st or the 2nd of March, so about a week after the invasion started. We got back on the 16th. And
So the invasion was, so you got back on the 16th and you were there like the 2nd, 3rd?
yeah, we were there for about 2 weeks.
And so you went there while the invasion was taking place.
Yeah, it was still not clear where the invasion was going to happen. The day we arrived, there was, there were reports that Belarus might be opening a second front in the north, and Russia was going to try to cut off the Polish border because of people like me and arms and equipment that were coming in through Poland. All of those just ended up being empty rumors, but there was some concern on our part.
And I'm pretty ignorant about the stuff. We went to Lviv, which is in western Ukraine. At first, people thought that was a safe place to go. When people were leaving the eastern and northern parts of Ukraine internally, they were going to Lviv. But eventually, that place got bombed too, for, I guess, strategic military reasons. So you had a lot of bravery to do that. What made you want to go to Ukraine?
Well, the first thing I should say is that, in any bravery that I or the folks with me exhibited pales in comparison to the bravery of the people of Ukraine who are fighting for their cities still to this day in Mariupol, Kharkiv, Kyiv, extraordinary acts of bravery that I pray we never see in our own country or anywhere else.
You got to see something that I have such a hard time imagining when I read it. I walk around, I'll say, okay, there's my house, there's a downtown building. If I were in Ukraine right now, it could be bombed and flattened. And I read about how people are living on sewage water and cutting down whatever last trees are around to try to have heat when it's 20 degrees. There's no food. I just can't imagine. I guess they've determined we're just not going to say thank you for coming in and take over our country. We want to make sure we can eat. That's a really interesting, basic human decision to make because people don't always make that decision.
I have to say one of the big things that, factored into my own calculus with this, and the reason I went over there is I went over with my wife to get her parents out of Kyiv. They were in Kyiv. And the buildup to that included, for me personally, watching the fall of Afghanistan last year, in July, August of last year, and the death of one of my interpreters who was murdered after the regime, after the government fell and the Taliban took over. Not clear who killed him. We don't know. It's not clear that it was the Taliban. It might have just been, lawless people settling some type of family grudge. But I saw that happen, and I was corresponding with him in the 10 days leading up to the fall of Kabul. People were rushing the airport, and he kept, we were corresponding on Facebook, and he was like, "What should I do? I need to get my family out, and should I go to the airport?" And I said, "Man, I can't advise you to go to the airport. It does not look safe to me. But what about Pakistan?" He's like, "I've got a family. I can't just walk across the border. The checkpoints are closed." I said, "What about Tajikistan?" He said, "Same thing. The checkpoints are closed." And so I had that, and then he was murdered.
Oh my God! Did you feel guilty, even though you weren't guilty in any remote way?
Of course. I mean, and he was not. Some of the interpreters that we worked with were, after they interpreted for us in Afghanistan, they went on to join the military or they left to come here. I know a couple of guys who are interpreters of mine who are in the D.C. area in Virginia. And this guy was, firstly, he was a patriotic Afghan. Secondly, just a really kind and gentle dude. Like, he just kind of wanted what America said it was bringing to Afghanistan: peace, prosperity, better jobs. He'd been educated in Germany. He had an engineering degree from like Heidelberg or something. And so just like a really good dude, but the least equipped person in the world to navigate the fall of a country. And so I've got this in the back of my mind, December and January, and we're begging my in-laws, my parents, my wife's parents, to get out of Kyiv, just begging them. And they wouldn't go for a variety of reasons. I think it's not unusual for people who are a bit older to be like, look, I'm in my apartment. I'm just not leaving my apartment. And I felt a real sense of urgency because of that to get them out. I feel
like I don't want to have another person I was close to get killed.
Exactly.
So you arranged to go there to get them out. You also arranged in advance with two buddies, fellow vets, to train some of this. So you try to do a double type of mission there.
So what happened was we knew we were going in to get her parents. We knew they were around Kyiv, and it was going to take some time to get them out of Kyiv. So we were going to be there for a little while. We got our tickets for 2 weeks. That's about as much vacation as I had from work.
It's so funny, medical school where you work as running the magazine. He says, you got 2 weeks. Go save the world and your in-laws.
Yeah, yeah. And so we knew that we were going to be over there for a little while, and my wife was able to plug herself into humanitarian aid efforts. So she was helping receive humanitarian aid that was being pushed in from Europe, from Poland into Lviv, and receive it and then in warehouses and push it forward to Kyiv and Kharkiv. Ukraine, 100%, I am behind them. Great country. There is a small corruption problem in Ukraine, and
if you read the stories that are still up on the Kyiv Independent from before, everything was about Zelensky aid, leaves parliament because of corruption, but now it's, obviously a different storyline. Yeah.
Well, in corruption is still a little bit of a problem. And there was some concern that like, hey, people in the United States are giving millions of dollars. We want to make sure that this humanitarian aid, this medical aid gets to Kyiv and Kharkiv and Mariupol and doesn't end up staying in Lviv. Unfortunately, the medical system in Ukraine is one of the most corrupted parts of the country. And so she was able to do that. She was able to receive these, I think something like 40 pallets from New York ultimately, and push them forward and make sure that they got there.
So you flew to Poland?
We flew into Krakow. I think most of the people that are going to Ukraine are flying.
And how did you get to Lviv from there?
So she was, my wife, due to the humanitarian aid contact, and I should also say that this is how beforehand we understood I'd be there for a week. So I told a couple of friends that there was going to be this training opportunity, of which I was aware. And so we flew in, and there was a bus waiting for us.
And how did you know there was an opportunity to train civilians for urban warfare?
I wasn't sure the opportunity was going to be that exactly, but I knew it was going to be training. I thought it was going to be training people for territorial defense forces, which is people signing up for basically like a National Guard style thing. Ukraine has a National Guard, but its National Guard is like quasi-police. The territorial defense forces is more analogous to our National Guard or
is
our
that because you have
reserves.
A network of other vets who keep in contact, and are you on a website or an email list that says here's how you can participate and help?
This was actually so early that there was one effort. There were two efforts that were being stood up, but I didn't really have visibility into them. I didn't I talked to people.
So how did you hook up? No, sorry. How'd you hook up?
Yeah, no worries. No, so what happened there was it's actually the Ukrainian diaspora. A friend of ours said, hey, there are people signing up for the territorial defense forces in Lviv, and so they need training. You can help out. And I should also say before this that I checked with a couple lawyers because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be, I don't know, violating any international laws.
Good thing to check. Yeah.
Right? I mean, you never know. And they said that there was sort of like everything in Ukraine is kind of legally a gray area right now. If you're fighting for the Ukrainians, it's a legal gray area, but that's a lot closer to black than gray. And if you're training Ukrainians, if you're training the military, that's like solid gray. But if you're training civilians who are going to be activated in the case of an invasion, that's like the lightest gray possible. And that's what we ended up finding.
So you had two missions when you went, Adrian Bonenberger, to Ukraine. One was to get your in-laws out of Kyiv, and the other was to train civilians to be able to resist Russian invasion in Lviv. What did you do first? Or were you doing them simultaneously when you arrived?
We were doing them simultaneously. I didn't see my wife for the better part of 2 weeks, unfortunately. We had this idea that we were going to be able to, this is our vacation. So we were going to go to Germany, go to Berlin, and instead we did this. And it was, wake up in the morning. I was out to go training with Matt and Ben, and she was out to do humanitarian
So she got
assistance.
them back from Kyiv? You didn't have to go to Kyiv?
We did not. No, we found a driver to get them from, they were in a suburb to the south of Kyiv, and it took them a couple days to get through all of the checkpoints. They ended up spending the night in in an abandoned school in Khmelnytsky, which is one of these cities midway between Lviv and Kyiv.
And are they back with you now? Did they come back with you?
They're with us. Yeah, right now they're tourists. They're here on a tourist visa, and my hope is that they will return to a peaceful Ukraine on the same tourist visa in the next few months. And if not, I'll be taking a trip down to Iris to get them registered.
We're talking to Adrian Bonenberger, who is a Brantford-born and still Brantford-living person, runs the Yale Medical Magazine here in New Haven, and he just came back from 2 weeks in Ukraine rescuing his in-laws with his wife and training civilians to resist the Russian invasion. We all admire what you did. You actually did what the rest of us can only imagine do, because we always wonder how we can help. So tell me about what a typical day was. Now, you mentioned Ben Bush, Matt Gallagher. These are two fellow vets. You served in Afghanistan. You told me they served in Iraq. How did you three team up, and what did you do every day?
I met Matt through the Words After War writing program in New York City when I was a student at Columbia Journalism School. He hosted essentially a writing workshop for veterans. And I think there were a couple civilians there too. It was very much about, exploring the space after war. And then I met Ben after the Words After War writing workshop. I put together an anthology with Brian Kastner, featuring original veterans fiction. And Ben Bush was one of the people that we were told to reach out to. I think Ben was a buddy of Brian's. So I met them through veteran writing circles.
What do you guys think about the things they carry? The rest of us think it's amazing. Do you think people who are that close to it, what do you think?
It's too good. I think, most GWAT veterans, have a little bit of a grudge against Tim O'Brien for writing such an excellent collection of short fiction.
You've written a book yourself, and you've written widely in Washington Post, New York Times, Foreign Policy, all sorts of places, and you're very well regarded as well. But then you were back in action. So tell me about a typical day in Lviv, what the three of you did.
The 2 weeks we were in Lviv happened to correspond with a long winter. So it was often most of the days it was in the low to mid 20s. There were a couple days when it warmed up and got into the 30s. And what we did is we were training in, I can't say too much about the location for OPSEC reasons, but suffice
you say
it,
OPSEC?
Operational Security. One of those silly acronyms you hear people bandy about. It was in let's call it an abandoned industrial zone. And we were training inside and outside in these sort of decaying Austro-Hungarian / Russian era factory buildings. It looked like a dystopian, future. And we would get there around 9 and we'd start training. Ben would run through a weapons handling module, because that's the thing that really is almost the most important thing of warfare, carrying a rifle, how to do it properly and safely. And then we would go into
Tommy guns, which I don't know what those are, but I know that that's what the gangsters used to use.
Yeah, with this weird round drum underneath. I was corrected online. If you go online with this stuff, you'll meet people who know everything about everything, and some people who know nothing about anything. And so I was told it's actually a Russian knockoff of the Tommy gun. It's called a PPSH or something, but it's essentially a Tommy gun. I mean,
but you guys brought the guns, right?
Oh no, these were. So what happened was about 25% of the citizens who were signing up for this were weapons enthusiasts and brought their own personal weapons, shotguns, AK-47s, AK-74s. And then the rest of them had never touched a gun before. A couple of them had airsoft rifles as sort of play military stuff. And so what happened was there was a museum nearby, and the guy who ran the museum was a friend of the person who organized the training, which was organized through Lviv city government. So it was essentially a local initiative.
That helps with legality.
It also helps with legality. And so he broke out his supply of World War II era weapons.
Well, that were on display? Like
that
he
were
had
on
a collection?
display. He had a collection.
Oh my goodness! So weapons that we think about art coming to life, and you have a comment from Helen Cowder. Speaking of that, so he used weapons that World War II era, brought them out of a museum, and you showed people how to use them. They still worked.
Well, we didn't show them how to use those weapons. The only actual weapons training we gave anyone was on AK-47s. We at the end of the course we got 500 bullets, so everybody got to shoot 10 bullets to familiarize themselves with an AK-47. And that's very important because before you fire a weapon, if you've never fired a weapon before, you don't fully understand or respect what it is. And what it is a very dangerous thing. And that makes the whole experience a lot more real, I think. But a lot of these things were museum pieces. Maybe they worked, maybe they didn't. There were German Mausers, there were Soviet Tommy guns, there were Soviet rifles. And it was just so people, when they were running through the drills, they had the experience of carrying something with them. And they understood.
And Helen Cowder, the founder of Our Space, says, a whole side of you I didn't know, so humbling to know that you did this. Thank you for your bravery, service, and please relate to your in-laws that I'm so happy they're here. Thank you, Helen. And you're listening to Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM 102.5 FM, live streamed at newhaven.org. We're talking to Adrian Bonenberger, who's back from training civilians in Lviv, Ukraine, to deal with the Russian invasion. Now, they were teachers, they were bus drivers, they were welders, and 80% had never handled a gun. Tell me about one person you met.
The person I met who probably had the single biggest impact on, excuse me, on me was a sort of jack of all trades named Vanya, and he just one of these sort of gregarious personalities who always had a clever remark to make about the cold weather or the uncomfortable situation. Never complained, just made sort of wisecracks. And he and his group of guys, they called themselves Alpha Team, and he was in construction, but prior to that, he'd been in welding. And I guess there's a lot of crossover there. And he, the last day of training, he came up to me and he had actually put together a bracelet, or his daughter had put together this bracelet for me, and then a ring and a similar bracelet in Ukraine's colors for my wife. And he said, these are for my daughter. Thank you for training us. And so I told him that I put it on, and I said, I'm going to wear it until Ukraine is victorious. So hopefully I'll be taking it off pretty soon here.
Okay. And so was he one of the 80% who never had a gun before?
Yeah, he may have handled a gun, but I'm certain that he had never fired one.
And Adrian, I noticed that you also were teaching them how to operate, because you had these burned out factory buildings. It seemed kind of perfect, given that when they confront the Russians, they're going to be in places that have been bombed. So I noticed you were teaching them how to look around corners to make sure they're safe. Because isn't it confusing in those situations about, you don't want to accidentally shoot somebody on your side, like who's who? The Russians are good at that, wearing the other outfits, the other uniforms. So what did you teach them about moving from place to place in the context of urban guerrilla warfare?
We tried to really focus on two concepts. One was security on a personal and unit level, and the second was communication. And we enforced strict hand and arm signals only communication sort of blackout, with the exception of entering and clearing a room, where we were sort of telling them to shout out clear when the rooms were cleared. Mm-hmm. We trained them enter and clear a room, which is the most difficult thing a unit can carry out. Not because we expect them to be entering and clearing rooms. We expect them to be on the defense, but to show them what the vulnerabilities of the stack are. What the vulnerabilities.
What's a stack? The
stack is when 4 people or 3 people get stack outside of a door to go into the door and clear the room. And it's, this is something that traditionally our military didn't train on. Traditionally, it was something that was for special forces, Delta, SEALs. It's a very dangerous thing to do, and it really only experts ought to do it. And so for us, we were teaching them to do it, not to teach them to do it in a sense, but to teach them how to move as a team, and also what the vulnerabilities of the stack are. We said, look, you're going to be fighting against this. This is what the Russians will be doing to you. What are the vulnerabilities? So we were doing that in the beginning, and then by the second week we had them preparing ambushes, and they were. One guy, I remember the first time we were teaching them sort of how to defend a room. He was like, "Oh man, this is much easier." And it's like, yeah, guess what? you're going to be doing the defense.
So in other words, you taught them how to be the people break into the room, not because they're going to, because the Russians are going to be doing it. So they want to know how their other side is thinking and what you can do to them.
Exactly.
But the communication was relevant because they'll be moving as a team through blacked out spaces.
Communication is relevant because they'll be moving as a team, but also because we were trying to teach them war on hard mode, so they could do war on easy mode. It's not hard to call out. It's not hard to talk to a person and explain what you want. But if you're used to communicating the barest essentials through brevity codes, through hand and arm signals.
What are brevity codes?
Brevity codes are things like, talking. That's when you talk on the radio and you use, code words like will comply to convey short words to convey longer sentiments or ideas.
Did they learn well?
They learned incredibly well. They're some of the most motivated people that I've ever trained with. Like I said, we would get there at 9 and we would train until 5. There were a couple of days when we trained until 6 or 7. No complaints in the cold, in bitter cold. I mean, I damaged my health when I was over there. I picked up a cough that, I'm still carrying around with me. And no complaints on their end. It was incredibly inspiring.
Why do you think, we talked about this a little bit before, why do you think Ukrainian people to such a widespread level are willing to give up everything, including their lives, including how they're living through misery, rather than just accept an invading army the way other people have in history?
It's a great question. I think, I suppose one people who would probably understand the Ukrainians intuitively would be the Israelis, because the Israelis are a people who, and Israel is a great example for Ukrainians for this exact reason. For years after 2014, I would hear people in casual conversation say, we should be more like Israel. I wish we were more like Israel, because Israel fought 5 wars against a coalition of countries that by all rights ought to have defeated and completely wiped Israel off the map. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the equipment, there's no reason Israel should still be a country today.
And like the Ukrainians, the Israelis were a people and a nation who were being told they weren't one.
The Israelis dug deep, and they're still a country, and nobody has the right to tell them any different.
And Adrian, so this was the work you did in Ukraine was an outgrowth of work, I guess, you did in Afghanistan. What was the work you did in Afghanistan?
When I was in Afghanistan, most of what I was doing, I had 2 pretty unusually, I guess you could say, kinetic deployments. So deployments where there was a lot of fighting. I was the executive officer of an airborne company on my first deployment, and I personally did not do a lot of that fighting. I watched it from the command post, and I was on the radio, and I was talking with drones and airplanes, things of that nature, organizing logistics. My second deployment, we did a lot of fighting in the north of Afghanistan. I was the company commander, the first in command of a rifle company with the 10th Mountain Division. And I was doing, I assume, what we thought the Russians would be doing, I suppose, in a sense, going after insurgents, going after groups of people that were resisting us for one reason or another. And it's hard to do. And the Taliban, we were defeated by the Taliban in a sense. My first deployment, we were not able to defeat the Taliban. The Taliban made huge advances on our territory when I was there. By the end of my first deployment, we were getting resupplied mostly by air because the Taliban had made so many advances. And my second deployment, we were able to defeat the Taliban for a number of reasons. But in both cases, I saw how difficult it was to fight against an entrenched enemy that moved seamlessly among the population. And I was thinking, one of the things I was thinking with Ukraine was like, this is a place where I can have some kind of impact. I can tell them what the hard parts are, and they can make the hard parts harder, and what the easy parts are, just sort of stay away from those.
And so it sounds like on the one hand, you made an analogy to what you experienced, to what the Ukrainians experienced, but then you said something so interesting to me, Adrian. You said, we were doing what the Russians thought they were going to do, smoke out insurgents and resistors. How do you feel about that?
Well, when I was in Afghanistan, my feeling was that it was okay, and I felt that it was embedded in a larger project. And since we've left Afghanistan, the government collapsed so quickly, and I've had to reevaluate that. And I'm still not, I really haven't even had the space to look at that,
Because I've always felt such deep sympathy from afar for soldiers who fight in wars where the country doesn't all feel it was a noble mission. Like what you did in Ukraine, you're a hero the day you step on the ground. When you go to Afghanistan or in Vietnam, you're putting your life on the line for your country, doing what the rest of us won't want to do and our government says we need to do, but then you come back home and people aren't say, way to go. Like you just had experiences that changed your life, traumatic experience. You could have died. You watched horrible things, but you didn't come back with parades, right?
Yeah, I protested against Iraq back in 2003. I think January of 2003, me and a buddy of mine, another Yaley, Aiden McGlaze, went up to down to New York City. And it always feels like you're going up to the city, doesn't it? Even though it's south. And we took part in this big protest. It's like 100,000 people. First Avenue was shut down. And after we went to war, and President Bush was reelected, I had this feeling that like I needed to participate regardless of whether it was a just war or not, because it was a war that our country was involved in, and I wanted to be a part of that.
I wanted to mind that a little bit because you had all the privilege. You grew up in Branford. You went to Yale. You're obviously a highly intelligent and successful person. You were willing to risk your life for your country that has a system in which people don't have to do that, unlike in some other countries. How did that happen that you became someone who was willing to risk your life and give up all the privilege you could have had to do a job that normally is relegated to people who don't have those opportunities? What led you to do that?
I think privilege, especially for people who have privilege, and I have some. I don't have as much privilege as some of the other folks we probably know in our community and in the global community, but I have some. Privilege only rests on the premise that you are willing to risk your life for a cause that is good or decent. And if you're not, and you can, if you're in a position, not everybody is. Some people have families. Some people, I wasn't married, when I signed up for the military.
You spent a lot of years there.
I did. I was in the military for 7 years.
A big part of your rather than coming here and trying to build a career where you get really rich or powerful, you spent 7 years in a god-awful place for your country. I'm
neither rich nor powerful, nor will I ever be.
But you came back with meaning, maybe. Also from Ukraine, we talked about before it came on. You talked about when you're serving the military. I don't want to put words in your mouth. How does one find a purpose and meaning in life when one's serving in the military and then when one is no longer there?
Yeah, and I think one of the saddest things about war is also one of the best things about war, which is that it provides sort of the simulacrum of solidarity. I mean, it's real solidarity, but it's not enduring solidarity. And when we're talking about democracy, when we're talking about an equitable or just country, the country that everybody, 99% of Americans want to live in, the town, the city that 99% of Americans want to live in, and probably not just Americans, everybody wants this. It has to depend on something. And the solidarity of war, I fear, lasts about as long as war. It's the easiest thing to access. It's why fascists love war, because it's easy solidarity. It's why Russia is probably never going to go off of its war footing as long as Putin is in charge, because war is easy to make solidarity. But I've always wanted the solidarity of the military or war to be a transitional point. I mean, it's given me the feeling that, or the hope that we could actually have all of that without war if we could just kind of come together in good faith.
Now you're in a country that's totally torn apart.
I know.
But then you went back to Ukraine. And so one thing we hear a lot about from people who served in wars, when you're back in sort of non-combat situations, that it's sometimes hard for some people to regain a sense of purpose or solidarity. Did it happen to you?
It wasn't hard for me coming out of Afghanistan, because when I left, we defeated the Taliban. I felt actually that I'd kind of accomplished my sense of purpose, but more than that, I just had to go. And they offered me a second command. They offered me a post teaching English at West Point, basically exactly the things that I would have done. Like that, like if I was going to stay in the military, that's what I would have wanted to do. But I was, by the end of my second deployment, I was shaking before every patrol. I passed out a couple of times. Like nobody saw me faint, but like I was having some kind of physiological reaction to going out and getting shot at. And so I was just like, I can't, if I stay in my current position, I'm going to expose myself. I'm going to be, somebody's going to see me faint, or I'm going to like lose my shit under fire, and I'm going to be a coward, and my men won't respect me. And I won't respect myself. So I knew that I had to leave. And, the question of purpose, I think, is.
Did you find in Ukraine? Did you feel you're doing something meaningful?
In Ukraine, certainly. It was one of the purest experiences I've ever had of just helping people. It was completely intense. I wouldn't say it was pleasant because, again, I became ill about halfway through, and I was just sort of burning. It was hard on my marriage a little bit, and I was burning the wick on both ends, but for a purpose. We understand that. Again, I know that that's almost like a drug, and it's not something that I want to do in war. We did these things in war because they were necessary for Ukraine, not Afghanistan. The real hope truly is that in prosecuting a successful war, Ukraine can leverage that goodwill and those feelings of solidarity into a meaningful peace where people are elevated, good people are elevated, people work together, and they can stitch together a viable democracy that minimizes corruption, the Holy Grail.
Speaking of the Holy Grail of media, you and your buddies were on Anderson Cooper. It was a really good report. He's a smart guy. I love that report. I watched the 7-minute video where you and Ben and Matt are teaching these folks how to take a room and all that. What was it like? How'd that come about that Anderson Cooper is following you around, and what have you heard since then about it?
It was serendipitous. Anderson Cooper's team was in Lviv, and I think they were near the end of a week-long hitch in Lviv. I don't know if they may have left, but I'm sure they're going back to cover more of the conflict. And I had, what happened was a Rolling Stone report or story by Mac Bishop William came out and talked about us and our training in ways that essentially like he said some things that were like revealed who I was. Like said, like a Yale veteran class of 2002 who was in the 173rd Airborne and joined the military in 2005. There's like 2 of us from the 173rd that went to Yale, and like the other one is one of my good friends. Actually, he's up in New York City. That wasn't me. So people started reaching out to me within 24 hours of that article, and I was like, okay, well, we need to have if we're out there, then we should be able to share this story with other people. And I'd heard that Anderson Cooper was in town, and somebody put his executive producer in touch with me, and they were like, what are you doing? When we explained what we were doing, and we said, you're welcome to come out and film the training. You're welcome to come out the next day and film our culminating exercise, this live fire range. And yeah, they just came out and did it. And they seemed really interested in it. Really cool people, really good people.
What have you heard? I mean, you became a celebrity for 24 hours, right? That like the Andy Warhol, minute of fame or whatever.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I've tried to, the people who have reached out to me, I've tried to push them toward, donating money if they can to Ukrainian causes, or if they're interested in volunteering, as some of them are, tried to put them in touch with people where they could get over to Ukraine and make a difference.
Do you think you'll go back?
If you'd asked me that question a week ago, I would have said no. But my wife and I mean, seeing the devastation that's been wrought in Mariupol, the city's been destroyed. And the damage that's been done to people's lives and livelihoods, I am thinking now, like, would it be possible for my wife and I? My wife is very keen on doing this, going back and taking part in the rebuilding. I just don't know.
You're thinking after
the war. And there's just not a lot more that I can do in the war, apart from writing Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal.
Who are with the program.
Yeah.
How's it going to play out? Do you think Ukraine is going to be able to hold off the Russians? Are they going to take over any? I mean, it's looking like they turned the tide somewhat in terms of Russians taking over any cities outside the east. Although, if I were Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, I don't know that I could sign any agreement with Putin, because it's not like he's going to keep it, right?
Zelensky has already said that
he'll be neutral. Yeah.
Agreement with Russia is going to be put to a referendum. And a lot of
how do you conduct a referendum in an under siege country?
Well, 80 to 90% of the Ukrainians say that they don't, the peace conditions they're looking for is a return of Crimea and a return of the East. I don't think that's going to be.
So how do you see this playing out, Adrian?
Personally, I think what's going to happen, Russia cannot defeat Ukraine. They can't. They can't right now. They can't 10 years from now. They can do a lot of damage to Ukraine as they are. They can crank more missiles. They can inconvenience more people. They can interrupt more lives, murder more civilians, damage more infrastructure, but they cannot beat Ukraine. They can't, because they can't secure the border with Poland and Romania. They'd need like 500,000 troops to do that. They can't do it. So they're wisely scaling back. There's going to be some type of negotiated agreement probably in the next month or two. Sooner if Russia is smart, later if Russia is dumb. And I don't know what Ukraine is going to have to give up. It might be something like NATO. The less Ukraine is forced to give up, the more palatable it will be to Ukraine. And I don't think Russia honestly cares one way or another what they get. People are saying like, oh, Putin needs something, or he won't look good. It's a fundamental misread of like how that happens in Russia. Putin can say he has whatever he has. He's got control of state media.
But how's he going to? You don't think he'll use a nuclear weapon in defeat that everyone's afraid of?
I don't think so.
Why is that?
I don't think Putin. I think the Russians have been very clear about where they would use nuclear weapons, and mostly what that comes down to is an invasion of Russian territory, which is essentially what we would use nuclear weapons for, or a retaliatory strike if they were struck by nukes. And I don't think Putin is going to use a nuke for two reasons. Firstly, because that is the one thing that would that might even unify the Chinese against him. Like that would certainly enrage India. All of the people he thinks of as allies would turn their backs on him, and Russia would be truly isolated, a true pariah in the international community. That's the first reason. The second reason is I believe he's actually a very religious, or not spiritually religious, but like religious person. And I think he believes powerfully in this idea of Kyiv as a holy city that belongs to Russia, and the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, which is where Orthodoxy, one of the places Orthodoxy was founded. For him to destroy that would mean, I think it's actually a very important place for him. I think Kyiv is the one place he really wanted to take in this war, and it's the one place that he's never going to get.
He even talks about Vladimir, the guy from 900 who was
his namesake
converted there, yeah. And do you see any hope of him being any kind of palace coup if they can get around that long table? Do you see any hope?
It's a real long table, isn't it?
I always imagine these guys like rushing the table like a football team to tackle him. But do you see any hope for palace intrigue?
I don't know. It's tough to hope for that type of thing. I think Biden spoke his mind the other day.
Yeah,
when
I'm
he
not
said,
so mad. I saw the Wall Street Journal, the editorial pages loves to bash Biden. They say, yeah, he wasn't supposed to say that, but he was right. Like, let's get mad at him about other things. We think he should be taking a stronger stand on the action, but like, that's okay.
Yeah.
He said, something true and wasn't the smartest thing to say. That's not what this is all about.
Yeah, like the people, I saw all these people online who are like, oh, how could Joe Biden say that? Like, Joe Biden. You don't think Joe Biden thinks that about Vladimir Putin? Come on.
And what's next for Adrian besides maybe Wendy going back?
Well, for now, it's continuing to edit Yale Medicine Magazine, doing School of Medicine social media. I'm looking forward to doing a story about all of the ways that the School of Medicine has helped Ukraine. I understand they've fundraised millions of dollars, and they've pushed a ton of medical supplies out. Individual doctors are getting out there to help the Ukrainians. There's a lot of good energy and goodwill at the School of Medicine for Ukraine, and I'm looking forward to helping tell those stories.
We look forward to continue to hear from you and watch what you do, Adrian Bonenberger. Back from Ukraine, helping prepare. Have you heard from any of the people you trained? How they're doing?
They're doing well. They're training more people. They're training other people.
Oh, okay. So the trainees are training others. And hopefully it won't get to Lviv that way, right?
I don't think it will.
All right. Thank you for what you did. We're proud that you're part of our community. You went over and you served us right. We're also proud of what you did in your other tours of duty. And it was a real pleasure to meet you and talk to you on WNHH FM.
Real privilege of mine. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks, Harry Droz, our station manager. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long on WNHH FM, New Haven's home for community radio.